Vetland is filled with conversations about self-care, with some of the best of those conversations being right here on this podcast. But sometimes I wonder whether focusing on self-care too much can become self-limiting in a way. Don't extend yourself. Don't take risks. Don't try. Because if you do, you'll just burn out. Which is not true. You are capable of so much more than we think. There's a quote that I really like that says, most of us never reach our limit. You almost certainly haven't reached yours. This is why when we set out on this podcasting journey, our aim was to highlight more of the positive aspects of this career. And which is why we look for people who take on the challenges of this profession with courage and drive and grit and a desire to make things better. And then they take those attributes and find ways to make it work for them and for those around them. Like Elizabeth. Elizabeth Woolsey Herbert is a retired equine veterinarian and practice owner. She moved from the US to Australia as a young vet and practiced equine veterinary medicine for over 35 years, most of it in her own practice. Here's a few lines about herself from our initial get to know each other emails. Number 1, I did the hard yards. Number 2, I often did it on a 24/7 basis. Number 3, I used to tell my students, the cool stuff happens at night. Number 4, I went through every imaginable bad thing that could happen and survived. She's also the author of a series of fictional and non-fiction books, as well as a string of professional papers. She recently retired and has returned to the US, where she's now focusing on her writing career and catching more fish. As you'll hear, hers is a story of courage, of putting yourself in situations that are way out of your comfort zone and then finding it within yourself to make it work. Elizabeth's story is filled with the stuff we need to hear. It's about a career driven by purpose and passion and a sense of responsibility, about the importance of creating relationships and continued growth, curiosity and creativity, using humor as a shield, and about finding joy in your work, but also fulfillment outside of work. Elizabeth talks about turf guiding between vets. She gives some practical tips on avoiding worry and shares what she's learned on how to build a great and supportive team. And we talk about the joys and challenges of rural practice and about her creative writing career. But there's also some darkness in this story, as there is in most good stories. There's an episode in Elizabeth's life that, when I was editing this, scared me for what it could have been. See, this is a story with a happy ending. But what if it wasn't? There's a risk with interviews like the ones we do on the Vet Vault. We interview the people who triumphed adversity, and we ask them how, and we admire them for their grit and their resilience, and we hopefully feel inspired and learn from them, as we should. Again, that message of you are more powerful than you might think is really powerful. But what if it was someone else in that position? Someone with a different personality, or somebody who didn't have that same passion for the job that Elizabeth has, or someone who had just one more burden to bear. See, I can't say with one breath that we should get better at being kind to ourselves, and then in the next breath say, chin up, duff it out, she'll be alright. I can't put not one more vet on my Facebook profile, and then mumble about the new generation being soft in my private conversations. So I'm dragging the darkness into the light with Elizabeth's permission. We're trying something new. You'll hear an addendum at the end of this episode with a psychologist where we pull apart some parts of this story. Dwayne Smith is an old friend from Perth who I used to adventure with. We've explored Indonesia on motorbikes together, shared many waves, almost started a bar together. True story. And I'm a big fan of the Chevelles, his surf rock band, which is a bit of a big deal in South America. None of which has anything to do with psychology. Or maybe it has everything to do with psychology. Anyway, the Dwayne I know is so far removed from anything psychology-based that I tend to forget that Dwayne is actually a highly skilled and very competent psychologist with decades of counseling clients and training and mentoring other psychologists. I pulled Dwayne in last minute to talk to us about what to do when those dark days come, as it will for most of us. What are the practical steps? Who do you reach out to? How do you reach out? And then something that I think is almost more essential for most of us. How do you respond when you see someone else hitting a rough patch, including the very difficult conversation around suicide prevention? We maybe could have made this a separate episode, but I think it fits nicely with Elizabeth's story. Tell me if you think we should have done it differently so that I know for next time. But first, let's start with the fun stuff. Story time with Elizabeth Woolsey Herbert. I'm Hubert Hinstra.
I'm Gerardo Poli.
And this is The Vet Vault. Dr. Elizabeth Woolsey Herbert, welcome to The Vet Vault.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Well, it's pretty exciting for me because I started, sorry, we keep talking over one another. I started watching or listening to your podcasts in Australia when I was driving around, the vet students that rode with me, because I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I think they got sick of the true crime stuff. So they said, why don't we do something educational? I go on, roll eyes. Yep, for sure. And then they put you guys on, and I went, oh my God, I love this.
That's so nice to hear.
So I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, well, that's lovely to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we've got veterinarian, retired veterinarian, right? You are fully retired. You're not doing any more vet work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
No.
Former practice owner?
Yep.
Author?
Yes.
Researcher? Yes. Is it fair to say you're a researcher?
Yes.
Mountain-dwelling recluse or not a recluse? Have you become, or not quite?
Well, I've tried to be a recluse, but it's very hard in Georgia to be that. So I'm actually pretty much out there now.
Okay, all right. So you're back in the US, but you did live in Australia for most of your career, is that right?
Yeah, 30 years. Yeah.
I've looked at some of your photos. I said to you in the email, I've looked at your photos of where you live now. I'm going to have to come and visit at some point so you can teach me how to fly fish.
Wow. Well, I had my classmate here this weekend, and she had never fly fished before in her life. In about 10 minutes, she caught her first fish, and then she caught 4 in about 30 minutes.
Wow.
And she became an addict. She was out the last day that she was there visiting. She was down at the creek practicing casting. So, yeah, it's fun. Please come over. Anybody's welcome.
So I'm so surprised because it's not easy. Are these trout that you fly fishing for, or what are you fishing for?
Yeah, these are trout. And so I bought a property that has a creek running through it, and it had existing trout and what they call a feeder. So, and that keeps the trout in the area. So we had Hurricane Ida and had 8 inches of rain, and it kind of wiped out the trout population. So I ordered a couple hundred, had them put in. They were 10 to 12 inches. And everybody kept saying, oh, man, you're getting little ones. And I'm going, yeah, well, I'm a girl. I don't care about size. But they grew very rapidly. I put them in November, and now they're 18 inches. I've had a couple that were 20 inches. So, and they stay in the area. So it's difficult fishing because there's a lot of overhanging trees. So you have to kind of slingshot your line into the water, and then you have to do a lot of mending to keep it in an area where the trout are. But after that, then it's not that hard. I took a little raft trip down a big river with a guy whose father was a former dean of the Tennessee Veterinary College. Mm-hmm. And he showed me these special lure worms. They're flies, but they're kind of wormy looking. And oh my God, they're fish magnets.
You see, I've had some horrendously frustrating fly fishing experiences. I love the idea of it, but the bloody fish. I've had this experience, where was it? In New Zealand years ago, just traveling, pre-kids, traveling with my wife. And we were up in what's the lake? What beautiful fishing country, just incredible streams and these crystal clear streams. And we went for a hike one day, and you could see the bastards just sitting there. Like they're just there. So I rushed back to town, rented a rod. Next day, went out there, casting on them, like literally on them, and they're just sitting there, just not even looking at me. No, not even interested in my fly at all. Zero. So I don't I think I've got the curse. My granddad used to say that some people have a smell on their hands that fish don't like, and I think I've got that.
No, that's New Zealand. So when I retired, I had 2 places that I was considering going. And one was New Zealand and one was back to America. And my best friend had moved to New Zealand, and I went out there several times to go fishing. And it's hard work in New Zealand, really, really hard work. You have to sight fish. You have to see them. The numbers aren't there. And all the times that I ever came to America to fish, I caught lots of fish. So I knew that it was going to be easier in America. don't think bad of yourself. I can't tell you how much money and time I've spent in New Zealand and not caught a fish.
Okay, that makes me feel. I've got more fishing stories, but I think we're at risk of having a fishing podcast, which I think many of our veterinary listeners probably wouldn't mind. I know several of them who would go, yeah, just go for it. Let's talk fishing. But let's move on to it. We're talking about stories. And I warned you that I'd do the question at the start about a statement that I saw once that says, bad decisions lead to good stories. And I like that because it often does lead to good stories. Have you got any examples for me that would corroborate with that statement? Support the statement.
Well, my move to Australia.
Oh, yeah?
So I was in the process of buying a property and a veterinary clinic in California. My dad was a horse vet, and I had practiced with him, and he had retired, and things hadn't quite worked out. I had planned to buy his half of the practice, but it didn't work out. And so I started my own, and it was very successful. Things were going well, and I was renting a place, and I always wanted a clinic. So buying a property, and I met this Australian and followed the accent. He had kids from a previous marriage, and there was no way that I was going to let him get out of being the father to those kids. So I decided to give up everything, move to Australia. And, to be honest with you, the marriage just didn't work out. So that part was the bad decision. But thank you, Lord, I moved to Australia because that was the best thing I ever did. I cannot begin to tell you what a great decision that was. I just can't explain it all. But I changed my entire lifestyle. I changed everything I did. And I don't regret an inch of it, good and bad. So that's the big one.
So where in Australia were you?
South Australia, Gawler, which is about 45 miles north of Adelaide.
Okay.
Just straight up near the Barossa Valley.
Oh, nice.
We were the gateway to the Barossa Valley and all that kind of stuff. So, and I had a huge practice area because there weren't very many vets up in that area at the time. There were some, and there was one good horse practice right in that local area. But I drew clients. Even at the end, I had clients that drove 8 hours, a couple 12 hours to come to me. And it was, very underserved area. But then again, there weren't that many animals, and practically you couldn't be a vet up there very well. So,
what did you love about Australia so much? Like what? I know it's not necessarily a simple answer, but what were some of the things?
No, I think it's pretty simple. Yeah, it's pretty simple. I think it was the clients. They were really good horse people, and California, especially, every horse was in a box. And they were crazy. And Rich Strike, I might say. I don't know if you know about Rich Strike, but Rich Strike is the horse that just won the Kentucky Derby. And he's in a box all the time. And he was a little enthusiastic after the race. And it's a big controversy over here because he was biting the pony horse and biting the fellow riding the pony horse when they were capturing him after the race. And it just was controversial. But over in Australia, clients, they grow up through the pony club situation, and they're actually very good horsemen. And so, yes, I had dramas and I had all kinds of issues with crazy horses and things like that. But in general, it was a much safer environment, I felt. And I grew up in it. My dad was a horse vet. So, I knew what crazy was. And my dad especially. But
sorry, your dad knew? Your dad knew, or your or he was crazy?
Oh yeah, my dad. So trial by fire. My father had racehorses, and he would herd them all up into the barn, and then he would individually pull one out, and then expect all the others to not come. And my job was to stand between the door and keep the one horse in one side and the one in the other. And it was like this ritual. And so actually it was a test for my husband. He had to do it, and he had never been around a horse in his life. And
Jeez.
he passed. He didn't pass other things, but he passed that test. So that kind of stuff very rarely happened in Australia. I felt, pretty safe. And I think it's because horses aren't boxed up as much in Australia. They're out, in a paddock and stuff. So that's one thing. But it was just the whole casual, the very first horse that I saw, I was going through the airport. I was having my equipment and stuff checked by a quarantine person. And the guy said, "Are you a vet?" And I went, "Yeah." And he says, "Would you go up and see a horse for me? I've got a horse." Serious. He said, "We think it has a broken leg. They can't get anybody up there for at least 2 more weeks." And I'm going, "What the heck?" And I said, "I don't have a license. I don't have anything." He says, "Well, would you just go up and do it?" And so
Wow.
I said, "Well, okay." So we drove up there. It was really hot. And we had, I just moved there. I had a car without an air conditioner, and I get up there, and this horse has a broken leg. There is no question. And of course, Australians, they have all kinds of means for euthanasia, and which are quite acceptable. And so I don't think that horse ever was seen by a veterinarian. I think that was just me and going. I mean, you could just take the fetlock area and move it, and you could hear crunch, crunch, crunch. And of course, it was non-weight bearing. And these people were quite happy to wait 2 weeks the horse was eating. Wait 2 weeks for their veterinarian to get up there. He came from a different area. And so I thought that was pretty huge. I don't have a single client that would wait 2 minutes in California. And so it was a lot less pressure. And that was another really nice thing, was less pressure for those kind of things. And I also worked in a rural area, and the clients they weren't high end, and the horses weren't high end. I mean, I occasionally saw the high end horse, but these people were pretty good and pretty accepting. And I can remember lots of cases where, like, I did a lot of colic surgery on ponies and in our area, and people didn't have the money. And I'd say, "Well, look, I got a vet student here, or I've got a new vet. How about if they do the surgery, and I'll be standing right behind them, and we'll charge you $500. And, normally that's way less than what I charged. And they'd go, "Yeah, that's fine." And so it was really fun to work with these people.
Yeah, wow. And has that changed? It's not been all that long since you've left. That sort of low pressure, yeah, she'll be all right, Australian attitude. I mean, those people probably were happy to wait 2 weeks because, well, they didn't really have much of an option, I'm guessing. I'm not sure. And have you felt that change over the course of your career? Is it more high pressure and more demanding, or is that a perception on our side?
I think it could have been if I decided to work with more high-end clients, but I chose not to.
Okay.
And there were high-end vets around. And I mean, talk about pressure. I had a veterinary school move in next door to me. I mean, they were 15 kilometers away. And so I went from being at that stage, I was just about, all the other equine vets had pretty well retired or moved into small animal or done something. So I was kind of it. And then all of a sudden I had, 8 board certified veterinarians in various areas of horse vets. And I thought, "Oh, this is the end. It's over." But it wasn't at all, because we served different kind of people. They kind of, they were a new clinic, and it's, in a new school, and they struggled with all the stuff that you would expect when you're starting off and building an empire. But we ended up kind of serving different clientele. And so it only enhanced my practice. It didn't, I could, if I had one of those kind of cases, I would send it over. I did lots of colic surgery on ponies and things, but I didn't want to do big horses because physically I'm only 5'2". I just didn't want to do it. So I ended up, referring things that I didn't want to do to them. And I kept all the good stuff.
Yeah. And the choosing of the clients, is that an active process, or did it happen sort of by default?
Yeah, they choose me. So it really is. It's their thing.
Yeah.
So, I think I was there for 30 years. I built a reputation. I had my things that I was super good at, and things that I was, not that great at. I didn't like certain aspects. I didn't like dentistry, for one thing. I did it, and I did it for years, but it just wasn't my thing. No, I did a lot of reproduction. We collected stallions, did all these colics, and I loved the weird and wonderful, but dentistry to me was it just was boring, and it was physically difficult. And, all of my friends that really love dentistry are now all have bad, shoulders or something like that. And so for me, that was just something I didn't like. I just didn't like routine. And I think that was another thing that was really nice about Australia. And I forgot about that. This is really important. There's nothing routine. I never knew what I was going to do day to day. We didn't vaccinate horses. Like in America, you just about make your entire living doing health care and vaccines and dentistry and preventive stuff. Over here, to me, it was like I chased fire engined all day. I never knew what I was going to do.
That's so interesting that that's a plus for you, because for a lot of people, I don't know, is that always been your nature? Because for a lot of people, not knowing what's coming in, that anxiety almost of, oh shit, what's the next thing going to be, is a downside. So why is it a plus for you?
Well, okay, so right to the very end, if I had a slow day, I'd go, oh my God, they don't like me anymore. or how am I going to make a living? I mean, to the very last day. We've only got 3 cases on the last day. Well, we're having a party, Yeah, I know, but there's only 3 cases. So it is, and I think it's our nature. I think we worry about, where's the next dollar coming from? But most of the time that was not the issue. So I loved it. And I purposely didn't look at the book and to see what I had scheduled for the next day in case there was something I didn't like to do. And that way I didn't worry about it. So in the morning I would walk up, because my clinic was at my house. I would walk up to the front and kind of look at I could look online. I had a great little system for scheduling our appointments and stuff. And I would look and see, oh, good, I've got 3 castrations, or, oh, good, I've got this, or I've got that, and things that I like to do. And then if I saw something like a dentistry thing, I'd go, I'll get it done.
Is that why you only looked on the day and not the day before?
Yeah, because I didn't want to know ahead of time if it was something I really didn't like. Why stress about it? So, I had a good idea about what I was doing because, I'm normal. But, if I didn't have to look, I didn't look until that day. It used to be that there were things that really would stress me out. Like I'm trying to think of what, collecting a really difficult stallion, something like that. Like, we had some stallions that I used to pay. I had a guy working for me who handled the stallions while I collected. And we had one stallion who was crazy and quite dangerous. And I used to pay him $50 per collection extra just so he would handle it. And then I switched and I said, okay, we got a bad stallion coming in. Here's some chocolate. So I'd hand everybody a piece of chocolate and we would go out and do this. Then towards the end, I was just so blessed with people that worked with me. And towards the end, the last couple of years, my nurses would not let me collect stallions. They said, nah, you're too valuable now. We need a paycheck. And so they did all of that at the very last 2 years. But, I was like 68, I think, when I was collecting my last stallion. So it was not... we were pretty good at doing this, and no one ever got hurt. And we very, very, very rarely couldn't get the job done. We took a lot of horses that other people were trying to collect where they needed semen that day. And it was, critical. They get it done. And their vet couldn't get the job done. And so they would run it down to us, and we could almost always do it. We just had a great system, and I had great help.
So what's the secret?
I think our setup was really nice. It was outside and it was in a good, safe environment, and
candles, romantic music.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. We just had everything going. We had a great mayor that we could use. I was so blessed to have 2 different mayors over the 30 years that lasted a long time and were easy to use. But we mostly collected off of a Phantom, and we had it set up. It was comfortable. It was a good size. We had, frozen urine from mayors that were in season and put a little bit of that in their nose, and off they went. It was a great system, but my staff were just so good, and none of them had ever done that. So I taught them how to do it, and they, went way beyond me. They were just absolute experts. We even had a stallion who was deaf, and the staff used hand signals they'd hold their hand up in the stop motion, and the horse would stand, and then they would, kind of circle their hand, and this horse would jump on the mount, and they were really good. So I think really important thing is my staff that I had with me over the years really enhanced my life. And they were fun, innovative, just great, great people.
Is that because you're good at choosing the right employees, or were you just really lucky, do you think? Like, did you have a very stringent interviewing process, or?
I think, a bit of both. Obviously, when people didn't work out, we found ways to move them on. But if in general, it was, again, there was this plethora of really incredibly talented horse people in my area. And so I did have a bit of choice on it.
Okay. That helps to have choice, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So once in a while, someone would leave and I would put out a notice saying that I was looking for somebody. And I didn't necessarily want, certified vet nurses. I mean, we had some, but most of them, I chose them because they were going to be good to work with, safe. And they always knew their number one job was to keep me safe. And if you ask any one of them today, they will say, my most important task was to keep the boss safe.
That's impressive. I'm going to interrupt you here to remind you about 2 things. First off, Elizabeth said in the intro earlier about how she was driving around with her students listening to the Vet Vault. Now, fantastic choice of podcast there. But if she'd wanted to brush up on her smallies medicine, surgery, and her emergency and critical care knowledge, she could also have subscribed to the Vet Vault Clinical to listen to us speaking to world-class specialists about the stuff that we struggle with in GP practice. But instead of me going on about how great the clinical podcasts are, and make no mistake, they're pretty great, I'm going to read you 2 lines from a very lovely email we received this week from a subscriber. I won't read the entire email because, well, it's personal, but I will do a bit of a humble brag with this. Our subscriber says, I can honestly say that the podcasts have genuinely saved my career. Honestly, no exaggeration. The podcasts allowed me to revise knowledge that was buried in my brain very deeply at time and become current again. It honestly gave me so much more confidence. Now, I'm not going to promise you that the Vet Vault Clinical will save your career, but that bit about the confidence, totally true. It's really nice to know your shit, and this is the easiest way to get to know your stuff again. Second thing, Vet Vault Live, Noosa 22. We're going live, baby. 22 to 25 November this year. Professor David Church, Professor Jill Madison. 2 days of learning, Vet Vault style. So that means no passive lectures, just engaged interactive learning with lots of questions, probably some interviews, lots of case studies. We're giving 50 people exclusive access to 2 of the best brains in smallest medicine in one of the most exquisite places in the world. And we're not just coming here for the learning, we're going to have some fun. Kayaking and hiking and surfing and yoga and cooking classes and gin drinking and some deep work with Philip McKernan and much, much, much more. The website isn't live yet, but if you email us at vetvaultpodcast@gmail.com, that's vetvaultpodcast@gmail.com, and tell us that you heard about the conference on the podcast and you're interested in coming, we'll send you the deets plus a special listener rate for the conference. Okay, back to Elizabeth. Let's rewind a little bit. So you arrived, went to see your first horse without a license. And where to from there? Were you employed or did you start your own show straight away?
Yeah, I tried to get some jobs, but it was just when the banking issues were going on in South Australia and they changed the taxation laws that made horse racing was no longer a tax deduction and things like that. So the industry was way down and nobody was hiring at that stage. So I did something really, really scary. I mean, like my heart was in my throat. I did some small animal work and I did some locum work. And
no, sorry, I'm laughing because I'm listening to you collecting stallions, and to me that's the scariest thing in the world. And then you say small animal work scary.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't go shark diving, so I've got my limits. So I hadn't done anything for about 7 years, and I had to kind of re-educate myself, but also getting that license. So I had to take the exams. I had to go up to Queensland and spend a week at vet school and being interviewed. And at the very end, I had to spay a dog. And I went, oh my God, I can't do this. And so I went to one of these clinics that was nearby that was interested in using me, but at this stage they hadn't because I didn't have a license. And the guy said, hey, come in, you can spay a dog with me. And so I did it. And I got through it. Anesthesia was a little scary too because I was used to horse anesthesia. So I arrived at the day that I was supposed to do the surgery, and the guy looks at me and he goes, Reg Pascoe, very famous Australian equine veterinarian, now deceased. And he goes, you're a horse vet, aren't you? I went, yes, sir. And he goes, you can do an intestinal resection and anastomosis. And I'm fist pumping going, yes, thank you. And everybody else there goes, oh my God, because they're used to small animals and they're thinking the spay is nothing. And I'm thinking, I don't want to do a spay. I'd much rather do that. And I had done several of them. So that was my thing. And so we're all different in what we're used to. But so I did small animal for a while. And then I eventually slowly built an equine practice. And I had some issues with trying to find a property, but I eventually found a property that was just ideal. It was amazing. It was an old factory where they made gliders, planes, and I was right next door to the airport. I had a hangar that you could put 12 planes in. We did one day. It's huge. And I had some good clients that helped me, that built an insert into one of the smaller buildings, and we put up fences and different things. So eventually, over maybe 3 or 4 years, I had a beautiful building and practice, and I lived there. And it was really, really good. But it was only sadly until maybe 4 or 5 years before I ended up finishing that I put in cameras so I could see these horses. And my life really changed because in the middle of the night, you're looking at a colic and you have to get up, go outside and look. And then all I had to do was look at my phone after that. And I could see, what was going on and, just all these things, innovations that just were wonderful to make it easy.
Oh, and was it always just you, or did you employ other vets as well in your practice?
Yeah, I did off and on. I had some really, really good vets that worked with me that over the years, but they didn't want to stay. And I think a lot of it was, it could be me. I don't think so. Couldn't imagine that it could be me. But I have to say, the area isn't really conducive to young people, to be honest with you. Yeah. And I think that's a problem. And I know that the vet school has the same problem, that people just don't want to stay in the area. I don't know. I loved it. But again, there was trout, but trout were just as difficult there as they were in New Zealand. So I wasn't going to stay once I got done. But as far as my practice life, if I had to do it over again, I would do it in spades. I loved that area. I loved those people. I loved the clients. And I loved the type of things that I saw, the variety. It was amazing variety. People kind of said that I was the weird magnet. And I think it was that there was so many things out there that we didn't know about. There was a very interesting plant, Oxalis pescapre, which is soursop, and it's very high in oxalate. And everybody kept saying, "No, it's normal. It's no big deal. It's no big deal." And then all of a sudden, I had miniature horses with bilateral fractured cannon bones, or miniatures with wobblers because their spinal columns were so depleted of calcium that
What?
really weird. And it just went on and on and on. I mean, like 5 or 6 horses died. Anyway, so I was lucky in that I talked to somebody at Queensland University, and they said, "Nah, it's your soursop." And we actually had a video of one of them walking, and you could see them walking with the soursop. Soursop's been around for years, but some years it's just really lush, and I think they'll eat it more if there's a lot of water and moisture. I think it takes the sourness and the bitterness out.
Mm-hmm.
So I did some research on that, and I published my first paper on that, which was pretty exciting. And I really wanted to publish in a particular journal, Equine Veterinary Education, which is the publishing journal for the American Association of Equine Practitioners. Not because I didn't think that the Australian journal was a good one, but the problem is that this was something that was international, and it needed to be seen a bit further away. And then also, I thought it would have a bit more scope going there, so I put it in, and they accepted it. And the radiographs are amazing. It's like skeletons of skeletons. You see the outline of the bone, but it's like so thin. That was pretty cool. And I should say that's another really great thing is that I had 2 men over the years that picked up my dead horses, and they were, as I always told everybody, the most important men in my life. And then we had these bizarre horses that were laying down or bowing down when they ate or shaking and all those kind of things. And I called PIRSA, Primary Industries, and said, "Hey, I got some pretty weird stuff going on here." Mm-hmm. And they went, "Yeah." And I do this a lot. So I'm kind of like the girl that calls wolf all the time. So I think they took that with a grain of salt. And I said, "Well, this is pretty weird." And they went, yeah. And I knew this horses had come from the Riverland, and they came down for a second opinion with me. And the vet up there had already sent some samples in. So we had some stuff going on, but it was pretty weird. So Prime Industries, well, that's kind of interesting, all that. And let's see how things go. Let us know. So I sent them a video of what these horses were doing, and instantly they were in. So they went up, the horses went back up to the river, and they went back up there to look around to see what was going on. And then I was seeing more and more of these bizarre cases. And it turned out it was this Kunjun virus, which is really West Nile. And it kind of came down from Queensland, and it was more a virulent, pathogenic kind of a virus. And I think we had 50 cases and 5 died. But I became a big advocate because I knew it would come back at some stage. I wanted to get them vaccinated, using West Nile vaccine and stuff. But then Hendra came on, and the Hendra debacle happened. And so the drug companies were not very interested in promoting a new vaccine. So we were just living with it. And I think we might have had 1 case after that, but it cycles, and it will cycle back, and eventually it'll happen again. I'm pretty sure. It does every place else in the world.
It sounds like you had a lot of fun in that role. So I have this perception, and I don't think it's just a perception. You hear people talk about it, or certainly, like you said, young people are scared of rural practice because of loneliness. Did it get lonely when you were far away from family and all of that stuff? Was that an issue, or were you having too much fun with sick horses?
Yes, it was definitely an issue because when I first started, there was no internet, and phone calls were really expensive. And I referred a lot of stuff to one of the big clinics there, Morphettville Equine Clinic, but I felt like I was becoming a bit of a pain, and I didn't want to call them too much. So I developed a few friends through the, just meeting colleagues and stuff. And I really wanted, I needed some kind of, I needed some friendships, veterinary friendships, but that really took years and years to develop, and very slow. I mean, they were turf guarding, and they were good and they were kind, all those kind of things, but I just wasn't their friend. And plus, they were kind of far away and stuff. So over the years, I eventually did. But once I joined a group on the internet, when the internet finally came, I developed many, many friends in America. And I think that was kind of one of the reasons I tended to think that I might be happier in retirement over here. And it's really turned out to be absolutely true. I've been just taken in by the several members of the American Association of Equine Practitioners. And I now have this network of retired equine vets that are just like calls every day from these people. What's going on? How's the fishing? Gone fishing with some of them. I'm going fishing in Colorado next month with another retired vet. I'm just having the time of my life. They all love my books on top of that, so that's always nice. But yeah, it was lonely. There was no, and especially, I went through a divorce. So that was like, you name, I love my life and I love my practice, but, I had the same dramas that are, just doing people in and in our profession. And I had to cope with them. Like, I had a daughter and I had stepchildren and I had staff, and I just had to suck it up and do it. I think my nurses that eventually, over the last probably 10 years of practice, became my extremely close friends. They are my family. I talk to them or chat with them on Facebook almost every day, one or two of them. And they are family now. So, but my very, very close friends tended to be Americans, and they tended not to be in the profession over there. So yeah, it was a little bit lonely, but suck it up, get on with it. And just, I kind of had this motto that I think is really important, at least for me. And I realize that it doesn't work for people that are going through, horrific problems. But my motto is, I choose to be happy, and I work darn hard at it because it's not easy sometimes. I find humor in everything I do. I mean, I can think of, on one hand, the number of times that I euthanized a horse that I bawled my eyes out, not in front of the client, but it was just absolutely horrific. But all the other times, even if it was sad, I would meet with my funeral directors and we would have a laugh about something while the client was not there. And this was both of our ways of coping with really sad events. And I promise you that they cried too.
Yeah, that gallows humor, the dark humor, it's a known thing, isn't it? I've heard stuff about the paramedic services and them. That's a defense mechanism.
It's absolutely a defense mechanism, yeah. And just getting through the day after my divorce, I actually went through a period of depression, and I tried to get some help, but it was at Christmas, and you just can't get help at Christmas. So I just kind of had to get through it. And I remember I was playing tennis with my daughter in my house. That's how big my house was. And because it was where they used to build airplanes. And she said something really funny. And I don't remember what it was at this stage, but I went, that is so funny. And I thought, I'm not feeling the funny, but I know it's funny. And I've got to remember this. Sadly, I don't remember what it was, but that was how, depressed I was. It was kind of nice because I did lose 20 pounds of baby fat, but yeah, it was tough. And I had to, psych myself out of this. Eventually I did. And it was, but I pretty much had to do it on my own. And I have all kinds of defense mechanisms. Surprisingly enough, you are going to be shocked to hear this. I've made mistakes. And when I made those mistakes, I had to, kick myself in the butt and find ways to get myself out of the funk that it caused me personally. And, humor was pretty important to me. Mm. I think doing laundry helped as well because it kept me humble.
Yeah. Oh, I'm listening to this. I'm astounded. I mean, practice owner, alone, divorced, depressed over Christmas. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. That's how things go wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, it would be. But I honestly think, we probably all go through extremely low periods. I mean, if you haven't been through an extremely low period, I don't think you've lived enough. And, most people get through it. And I just found that I would find a way to, get myself out of it. You don't lose 20 pounds or 10 kilos because you want to. I mean, it just, your heart's racing, you can't sleep, you can't see anything funny. I remember going out to castrate a horse, and I had to think about everything that I had to do that. I just kept having to go through it in my mind because I couldn't just do it like I would normally do it. And I showed up with 2 belts on. And the guy said, "What's going on?" And I went, and he goes, "You got 2 belts on, you know?" And he was a good guy, good client. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm kind of thinking about things." That's basically, I think, what I said. So anyway, those were tough times. And it wasn't just that. I mean, when you lost a case or something that you really wanted to save, it was sad. But then again, I would remind myself that I needed to think of something funny, or I needed to do something that would make myself feel better. And I would think of funny things. And, you probably maybe can't tell from this interview or not, but I'm pretty darn funny. So at least my kids laughed at some of my jokes. And that's a real test, because what teenager thinks their parent is funny? But my staff and stuff, they said I was funny. So I just found humor in situations. I can remember this one colic. We brought the pony to the clinic, and all of a sudden, this pony lifted its tail and it had an explosion of diarrhea and sand and all kinds of stuff. And I brought the pony back to them, kind of on the other side of the oval, and they went, "Yeah, we should have tried putting it in that horse float first. Then we wouldn't have had to do this." So I'm sitting there. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. And I should have been mad, but I just saw it I thought, this is going in a book. This is definitely going in a book.
In a book. Were you writing back then? I will come back to the writing. I'd love to dig deep into that.
Yeah, I started, I think, right after my divorce. I went from a very high social life to 0 just about. And so I had a lot of time on my hands. So I decided I would start writing up these stories. And I had particularly one day in which I had 2 dystocias. I had a horse, a stallion that jumped a fence and ripped open his groin, and his testicle was coming out the side of his thigh. I can't remember all the things that happened, but just tons and tons of things. It was like one of those days like you just would not believe. And the next day I was talking to one of my nurses, and she goes, I said, "I never want a day like that again." And she goes, "Well, you're probably going to have one. And besides, it'll be good for the book." And I went, "What book?" She goes, "You're going to write a book." And I went, "Nah." She goes, "Oh, yeah, you're writing a book." And I did. And so I wrote a book called Horse Doctor, American Vet's Life Down Under. And that was published in 2005. And that was just true stories of my clients. And, there was funny and sad things, all kinds of stuff, lots of, drama and stuff. And that was very early in my career, and as far as my writing career. And so, that's when I started. And then I did another one. I found my dad was a World War II navigator and flew missions over Germany. And he had sent letters home to his family, his parents. And his parents collected all the letters, put them in an album, each one handwritten letters. And I didn't know about it until just shortly before he died. He never, like most men, he didn't talk about it and anything. And my stepson was a pilot in the Air Force. And so he felt compelled to talk to Duncan about all of the things that he had experienced, because Duncan was a fighter pilot. And so he brought out these albums that I had never seen anyway. So when my dad died, I took all the albums and copied them and put them in a book, mainly just for my family. But it turned out it is historically significant. And so that was my next book. And then 2 years before I retired, again, I was going through a period of which I wasn't being very socially active. And I developed this habit of getting up at 4 a.m. to study. I actually attempted to become board certified in, they call veterinary practice, basically. So I had to study for exams, and I had to write papers and do all kinds of stuff. And I had a full-time practice. So I ended up just telling myself, well, the only time no one's going to call you is early in the morning. So I got up at 4 a.m. and I studied and I wrote the papers and I did everything. And then when that was done, then I also wrote one about colics. And we had the Pinery Fires, which was a big fire event. And we had 8 horses in, and we took care of these horses that were, pretty critically burned. And I was very lucky. I had a really good friend in California, a guy named John Madigan. I call him Dr. Disaster. He's a very famous vet. And he says, write it down. He says, nobody publishes about it. So I wrote that up, published that one, and then did the colic one. Then I thought, what the heck am I going to do? And so I'm awake at 4 a.m. I can't sleep. And I thought, I'm going to start writing a book. And I'd always thought about this subject. And so I decided I was going to write about vets. And I just dedicated myself to that idea. And so they're fiction. And the first book is about a woman who time travels back to the 1800s and ends up in a kind of like a situation of a television program that she'd watched, kind of like, Rawhide or Gunsmoke or Bonanza or one of those. And so she's in that. And so, but this has the perspective of modern time and meets real characters as she's moving across the United States to try to find how she can return back to her time. And, she's going like, well, yeah, this is fun, but, come on, there's no tampons, there's no Oreos, there's no antibiotics, there's no x-rays. And so it kind of, it's serious and it's adventuristic, but it's also got lots of humor.
It sounds like a heap of fun. I'm just so in awe of, because I know a lot of people, one of them sitting right here, who have thought of writing books, but to actually start doing it it's a whole nother thing. What was the drive? What was the motivator? Why do it? Just for fun, just as an outlet?
Because I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep at 4 a.m. And, well, I was worried about what I was going to do financially to retire. And I'm not, I wasn't that great of a business person. Okay, I was failed in business, let's put it that way. And so it wasn't like I was going to have a ton of money or anything like that. But I thought, what can I do? And I thought, I was thinking about writing books that would follow these young kids, like the Saddle Club and these kid novels where girls wanted, had horses and stuff. But then I thought, well, let's take it a bit older. And so I started actually writing one about kids who wanted to be vets. And like when you ask, 5 to maybe 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, what do you want to be? If half of them don't want to be vets, there's something wrong, because that's what everybody wants to be. Now, eventually, there's an attrition to that. But I thought that would be a good start. So I started to write that book, wrote it as a novella. And then I just wasn't getting the kind of response from my friends and family that I thought I would get. So I kind of just put it away. And I thought, I wonder if you could, make money writing books and stuff. And I have yet to discover that. I'm sure there are people that make money, but I don't care. I'm having so much fun. I could care less. I just like it when people call me or write to me and say, I read your book. I love it. Thanks, that kind of thing. And so that to me is my motivation.
Yeah.
And then I also fall in love with the characters. And so, like, as I've written recently on Facebook, I'm sorry that I have been neglectful to you, but I've, fallen in love with one of my characters. And sadly, he's died. I'm going through a grieving period, and then I will rejoin you.
Now, your one character, is it Rebecca Harper?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that the one you were just talking about? So she's an American horse vet who works in Australia and then moves back to the United States.
No. Oh no, that's Maggie Kincaid.
Oh.
That's the other. So there's 2 series. One is the Rebecca Harper series, and that's 4 books.
Okay.
And that's over. She's from the 1980s. She goes back to the 1850s, and then she eventually, in the 3rd book, her daughter who she had left in America. She couldn't get back. So her daughter becomes a vet as well. And it's her story too. I'm not going to say what happens, but so the two, there's, two vets living kind of almost in parallel universes. So then there was the second series is more about fly fishing, although I have veterinary stories in all of them. I mean, and these are all stories from my life. These are things that I experienced. The Maggie Kincaid is more like me, and it's an American vet who lived in Australia, practiced, retires, moved back to America, finds a cabin with a creek on it. Now, here's the thing. This was all written before I actually did this.
I was just going to ask you that. I was going to ask who was first. Who did
She was first.
Did you follow her or did she follow you?
No, she was first. And she becomes involved, and she kind of becomes romantically involved with one. There's two interesting men that are in the community that she moves to, and she becomes involved with one, and then she eventually travels to New Zealand to go fishing, and with one of them, with all these dramas happen. And that seems to be the one that I seem to have managed to find a lot of old geezer retired horse vets. And a lot of them were past presidents of the AAEP. And so they're kind of higher up guys. And through one of them, he sent books to a lot of them because he liked them. And he kind of got me going. And so then all these other vets kind of all got interested. But the problem is that I need a bigger clientele than past presidents of the AAP. So hence, I'm starting to do a little advertising now. Anyway, so it's lots of fun. And then the one that I've just written, the one where I'm still grieving, and I am grieving, is about an older male vet. And I tend to write about older people because I am older, but an older male vet who's dying. And he asked this woman who's slightly younger, not much younger, vet to come and help him write his story before he dies. And that's a really good one. I really enjoy that one. That's probably my favorite so far, but they're all about veterinarians, and that's what I've stuck with. So I have to be kind of careful because I don't want the veterinary profession to be in a bad light. I mean, yes, I could do that and make it a lot more exciting and all kinds of things like that. It's pretty exciting as it is, but I tend to keep the good guys as the vets, pretty much, not completely. There are bad ones. The first book that got published is a book about a woman, American vet, who lives in Australia, and it's all in Australia, and it's in a rural Australian community, which would be kind of like the town of Burra in South Australia. It's not Burra, but it's like it. And she's married to a doctor, and she's accused of murder, and how she has to deal with this. So that's called Small Town Secrets, and it's gotten some really good reviews and things. So, I got all kinds of things going on.
There's so much. You're pumping out so much content there. I'm still curious, the one that moved back to the US. So did you write that while you were in Australia and then you went?
It was all written before I retired. All of it was written before I retired. So I wrote it early in the morning.
So was that subconsciously your plan, or did you write that book and go, damn it, that sounds really nice. I think I'm going to do what she did.
A bit of both. So I had always thought that I wanted to move someplace where I could fish. And having fished in New Zealand, like you said, it's hard work. And walking over those stones and stuff. And I knew that there were places in California and thought possibly in the South. I'd traveled to North Carolina to look around, and I thought that might be a place that I might like to be. But somebody, a veterinarian on one of the veterinary talk groups I'm on, said, get a lot of bang for your buck in Georgia. So I started looking around there, and then my sister found this place. It's it's just this most beautiful place you could ever imagine, and with a creek running through it, wonderful neighbors, cute little town, and access to everything you could possibly need. Mountain climbing, fishing, hiking. It's wonderful. No complaints.
No complaints. It sounds like an amazing retirement. I want to just circle back briefly to your working life, your career. Again, it sounds amazing, but you said a couple of times through the tough times, I toughed it out. I stuck it out. I toughed it out. which is, I feel like these days, I don't know, we're trying to avoid it. We're trying to avoid situations where we have to tough it out. Are we soft? Are we too soft? Or should you have, like, looking back at your life, are there things that you think, well, I could have done that differently in a way that it didn't have to be that hard? Or do you think these days, but sometimes we should just say, look, just, yeah, you could just tough it out, right?
I think veterinary medicine is a very difficult profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was just as difficult during my time as it is with the younger people. But what's different now is that we have social media. And so we all know what we're going through. And hence, it maybe makes it, we just know that people are suffering because they say it. They say it right on social media. I even tried to say something nice to somebody that was having a really hard time. And she admonished me for, I have a right to be sad. If I want to be sad, I'm going to be sad. And if I want to feel bad for myself, I want to do that. And I'm going, well, I got a real education from that woman. I think we've made it okay to be like that. It's not that it's okay or not okay. It's more that it's acceptable and we know about it. And I think social media has probably made even the ultimate choice slightly more acceptable than it really was. And that's not to say, I mean, I know lots of people who have made that choice before social media as well as after. And I don't know, I just feel like, when I was going through my thing, the one thing that never came up was the idea that I was going to kill myself. I couldn't. I had family, I had responsibilities, I had all these things. Now, I wasn't going to do it, and it wasn't like there was ever a thing about, well, I could end it all. I was never that bad. And so I know that there's people where it's so bad, and I can't really speak to their problems because it's just not something I've experienced. I'm not a professional in that, in that respect. And I don't know how to address that other than to say that I think we keep looking and discussing the people. And I remember that a whole bunch of vets were on a television program in Australia before I left, which I can't remember the name of it, on the ABC, discussing, depression and suicide and all the issues. What I would love to do is to get together all the people who have gone through those same things and came out the other side. What did they do? What were their coping skills? And I think we need to invest more in those people to figure out what they're doing that is different from the people that are not coping well.
Well, that's why we're talking to you. That's exactly why I keep digging. Because when you talk about those tough times, those are tough times. Those were really high risk times. That's when, as I said, that's when things can go around. But we're not. I mean, suicide's obviously our extreme example that we often talk about. But beyond that, just career dissatisfaction or
quitting, just quitting the practice.
Exactly, just quitting
the
practice.
But I think we just need to get on to, when we talk about people that were in the Olympics, we don't go to the people that didn't make it. We talk to the people who at least got to the Olympics. And so I think it's not that we don't need to look at that part, but I think, yes, there is an issue and all those things are going on. But let's look at the people who succeeded, who got beyond these difficulties, and how did they get beyond these difficulties? And I know that in social media, when people talk about this kind of stuff, they're shut down by the negative Nancys, basically. Like they're almost, like pariahs. I really feel like we need to have a different conversation.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I totally see what you mean. You feel like it can become an echo chamber where we all say how bad it is, and then you start thinking, shit, maybe it is bad. Maybe,
yeah. Well, I think it is bad, but yeah, I think there's all kinds of issues. And I, we keep talking about all the, like the student debt and the pressures and the negative clients. Well, gosh, I mean, I've, had my butt chewed out by lots of clients over different things. And I've had, I had student debt I didn't come from a poor family. My dad was a horse vet, but I came from kind of an astute family. He didn't pay for my education. I had to pay for my own. So I walked out with student debt just like everybody else. But by the same token, the way veterinary schools are financed and stuff, and universities in general, have put a lot of pressure on students to come up with the money, because the money that used to come from, so in University of California system was financed by horse racing. And then that petered off. And so they had to come up with money from other areas. Pretty soon those areas dried up and the financing dried up. And so it put the burden onto students. On top of that, the middle management grew enormously. And I'm friends with a human doctor who was a professor at a university, and she said when she started, the entire financing for the medical school was in one room. When she left, it was a whole nother building. And that there's this burden of feeding the middle people, and which the students are doing. Their tuition doesn't just go to the professor and the building, it goes to a myriad of middle people.
Wow.
So, and universities, where the chancellor of the university is making more than the president of the United States. Like, I'm going, what the heck's going on here? Like, we've just high-end people are making bazillions of dollars, and, the low-end people are not. And so that's an issue to look at. And well, maybe we need to refinance how we do veterinary medicine on the education. On top of that, the students are coming out with far less skills because they don't get this interaction that we got. I don't know about you, but we went through surgeries. We did tons of surgeries. Now, these were going to be animals that were going to be euthanized. And as far as I'm concerned, it was a very safe and a very caring environment that no animal, suffered. They had a needle stick, and that was it. That was the only pain they felt, because that was the anesthetic, and then the surgery was done. Well, a lot of times those kind of things don't even happen anymore. And I know that the local veterinary school where I was, the students were hardly getting to do anything because their caseload was so low. And so I started a student castration clinic thing. I was only 15 kilometers away. So the students would come on a Saturday. We would castrate horses. And it became extremely popular with my clients as well as the students. And a few weeks ago, one of my staff members sent me a video. We were having one of our final lunches, and we had the vet students with us. And so there was about, 10 of us or so sitting at my table eating lunch and talking about what the best part was. And one of the students said, this is what I learned. I feel confident I can go out and castrate a horse. And I went, whoa, I didn't feel like that. Here was my dad as a horse vet, and I did not feel comfortable when I was so nervous when I did my first one. And she said, I really feel comfortable because I've done so many with you. And that's something that we need to maybe look at, the way we educate some of these kids. Instead of having these monoliths of veterinary schools, maybe we need to get them out in private practice to get more of their experience that way.
Yeah, wow. All right. We probably have to start wrapping up. I can talk to you. It'll be lunchtime by the time we finish.
Yeah.
You clearly, you're a writer, so I'm guessing you're a reader. Do you listen to podcasts at all? You've said you're a VetVault listener, so that obviously puts you in a special class. But are there any other podcasts that you like to listen to?
Well, I've listened to a lot of podcasts from veterinary things. I do a lot of CE that way. And I still actually keep up, even though I don't even have a license over here. And I don't really have many expectations to get one, unless I can't get some Penticin for my damn dog through these people here in America that don't use it that much. Hint, hint to the general public. Penticin is always appreciated. But I have to say, a lot of true crime. And things like that. But a lot of veterinary, like I do quite a bit of CE through that Boehring or Ingelheim that has some nice ones. I don't listen to, I used to listen a lot to the revisionist history
Oh, yeah. Malcolm Gladwell. That was a favorite of mine.
Yeah, Gladwell, yes. Yeah, I love those. I don't even know if it's still going because I haven't listened for a while.
No, not really.
Yeah.
No, he hasn't really. That's why I sort of stopped. It sort of fizzled. He's got so many other things, but I like that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that was good and things like that. But yeah.
You should. I just had a great insight. You need to do a veterinary-based true crime fictional. No, not true crime. Fictional crime podcast.
Yeah.
there's your thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a kind of bit of real crime going on too, but I try to put veterinarians in a good light. So
yeah,
anyway,
okay, yeah, fair enough.
And I kind of keep it kind of clean too. So
okay,
I mean, I might have thoughts that are way less than clean, but I don't put it in the book. So I figure the dean of my veterinary school is 90 years old, and he's still alive, and he's read some of my books. And he's a very just well-respected man. He's not going to read sex from me. That's just not going to happen.
So that's your filter, is it? That's your. They talk about you have to write for it.
Oh, I have. My sisters are pretty good too as filters. They're kind of clean people. So.
You have to write for an avatar, and your avatar is a 90-year-old ex-dean of a vet school.
Yeah, kind of something like that.
You might be surprised. You might be surprised what he enjoys, actually.
Well, anyway. But one thing that I did want to mention that I really liked was I actually took a Dale Carnegie course, and I learned how to do public speaking. And I learned a lot of things about human interaction and also how to decrease your stress. And part of that is by putting it in a compartment. You got a bad thing that happened, put it in a compartment.
Yeah.
Leave it in the compartment. Don't necessarily, dump it. Keep it in mind. I'm always reminded when my very first year of veterinary medicine, I had a foal die from a ruptured bladder that I underdiagnosed. And if I ever feel like I need to be humble, or if I need to feel like, this is, I'm not that great, I think of that case. And so, but that's in a compartment, and I only bring it out when I need it.
There's a Dale Carnegie book, old book that I really like. Something about how to worry less, or
how to win friends and influence people.
That's the famous one, but then there's another one. I've got it here somewhere.
How to stop worrying and start living, or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. That's a really good book. Yes. Like it's the original, I want to say self-help genre, but there's some really bloody good advice in there. Solid, and that compartmentalization that's in that book, along with quite a few other ones. All right, cool, good book recommendations. Okay, and then our last question. So, if you had the opportunity to speak to the current webinar 2022 class of veterinary graduates upon their graduation, and you could give them one message, what would you tell them?
I think the important thing is that I talked to actually one of the AAP presidents last night saying that I was going to do this. And one thing he said that I thought was really important, and he did a lot of financial advice for students and stuff. Today, you cannot go to the bank, you can't go to your doctor, you can't go to anybody and think that's that their solution or their suggestion is the only thing. You really have to do your research. Research where you're going to work, research how you're going to finance yourself, research your medical or emotional problems, get different points of view before you make decisions. And I thought that was pretty important. So I think just do that, and then also just find ways to make yourself happy, and find if you're not in a practice that you'd like. And the first practice I went into, I did not like at all. I was gone in about 3 months. I'm not going to go why, but it was not good. And I was gone. And I think instead of, hanging in there and trying to change these old geezers or trying to, of course I am one now, trying to make things better, don't do it. Find some place where you're going to be happy. And if you have to do your own practice, do your own practice. If you want a practice that is 9 to 5, make your practice 9 to 5. do what you want to do to make yourself happy. I think as long as you're a good vet and you're a caring person, and I think caring is 20 times more important than even being good, you will develop a clientele and you'll be able to make a living.
I really like that bit of advice with basically be proactive.
Yeah.
I had this conversation today with somebody about we get stuck in these situations, and when we get so stuck in it and short-sighted almost about your own problems that you forget that for the most part in the free world, it's up to you, really. You can decide to stay stuck or you can decide to do something about it. And I think it can be tricky for us as well, because you don't get through vet school by being a quitter. And so making that decision to say, well, I'm going to stop. I'm going to leave this thing, or I'm going to leave it behind, can be hard, but it's in the end, it is up to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a fan of leaving the profession. I think one of the things that I actually have the world's record number of rejections from veterinary schools trying to get in. So I knew what I was getting into. I had worked at 2 veterinary schools for 10 years, I think, before I even got into veterinary school. And my dad was a horse vet. I knew what I was getting into, and I wanted it. And I, had to do all kinds of things to do it, but I eventually got in. But I feel a sense of responsibility to the fact that the governments, the state, did finance part of it. My tuition wasn't that high then. It was high enough, but I feel there was somebody that didn't get in when I did. And I really wanted to continue as a vet. And I think quitting, a couple years in is kind of like, well, bad choices by veterinary schools on who they selected. But by the same token, I just felt this responsibility. And I wasn't going to retire, at 40 or anything like that. And financially, I could have retired 6 years earlier. But, I didn't want to. I loved what I did. But I did, in deep down, feel a sense of responsibility to my clients, to my staff, to society, for the fact that they gave me this absolute privilege of being a vet. And it has been an absolute privilege to do what I've done. I worked hard at it, but still, there's a lot of people that would like to have been where I was.
Yeah, we forget that.
So don't quit. Find some part of it that you can enjoy.
Okay, so that's Elizabeth and her story. I love her guts. I'll just jump on a plane and move to a new continent. I'll just go straight off the plane and go to euthanize a horse. I'll start a practice, start a research project, write a series of books. Love that energy. But I promised you a little bit extra for this episode. I had some more questions. So here they are with psychologist Dwayne Smith. First question, at this point in time in Australia, it's Christmas, you're alone in the outback in a little practice. Things aren't going well with you mentally. What's your first step? Where do you go with it?
Look, yeah, it's an interesting one. And the isolation, I think, is something that comes up for me as a psychologist. Even though she may have a good team around her and be with her daughter or what was going on, there's a lot of people that don't have those sort of support networks that are actually there and end up in a hotel room by themselves. I think isolation is a big one, right? Loneliness, core sort of existential loneliness, that I'm the only one in here experiencing what I'm actually experiencing. But there's some great organisations out there to ring and speak to a human being over the phone, or even digitally these days, but speak to another human voice, because it is about attachment. So one of the main protective factors around suicide, particularly, or depression and mental health, is that you're doing it alone. So you need to connect to somebody. So a protective factor is actually to engage. So that's why those things like Are You OK days that happen around Australia, and we can, laugh at the simplicity of it, but it is actually extremely effective, which is that if you're seeing someone in distress, or you're seeing someone, even if you're not seeing active signs of tears or that they're burdened, but there's something just not right with them, that the are you okay? So there's another human being actually reaching out. Now, for somebody who's feeling that hasn't got those people around them, Beyond Blue has a really good helpline. Samaritans around Australia, you can call that and speak to somebody 24/7. There's obviously for kids, there's kids sort of helplines, and the kids do use the helplines. But it depends on our age, right? Because there's that sort of still that stigma around about how do I reach out and who do I reach out to, and do I really want to? Do I really want to share the burden of what's going on? And those things can be barriers to people seeking support. So there's two edges of what do I do, and am I willing to do that and reach out? So that's an internal individual responsibility. Look, I think there's embarrassment that I'm not coping, particularly if you're looking in a competitive work environment, and what the culture is in within the work environment. And you'd know a lot more about the vet industry than me, but to be able to put your hand up and go, look, I'm not actually doing too well, is seen as possibly a failure. And I think this is changing culturally in Australia in particular. But that whole idea of, before even asking for help or saying that you're not okay, is the recognition within yourself that it's not. Right, so that might be your sleeping patterns are out, you're worrying or ruminating about something, you're going down the rabbit hole thinking about things, you're socially isolating, so you're not taking on opportunities to go and speak with people or talk to people other than work stuff. That you're lethargic, that you're not eating well, all those sort of well-known sort of signs that things just aren't right with my body are usually some of the things that are not right with my brain, because there's a mirror sort of thing going on there. You can't be not great in your brain and also great in your body. But in saying that, some people do really well to mask it, right? So you'll see people that on the outside, they go put up this big proxy self, which is, I'm all right and I'm doing okay. That helps them and sustains it through, and it's part of resilience. But we've got to be real and actually be vulnerable to connect to other human beings. And so back to your question, we feel that we may be judged if we say, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm lonely, I'm isolated. And we think that we're a burden on other human beings. But an interesting thing happens here. It's human empathy, right? Which is that we see inside someone who's saying that our own sadness, and we want to connect, we want to attach. We're mammals, and we want to actually engage with other mammals in a social and supportive sort of way, the majority of us. And look, a lot of research points towards that if I ask, then someone's not going to be there for me, is a big barrier. But the research suggests that, I think it's a 99-1 rule, right? That 90% of people will go out of their way to support you and do something about it. 9% of people might not, given the circumstances about what's going on for them. And 1% of people just won't, right? So it's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah. If I think about it for myself, but then also what I imagine in Elizabeth's case, a couple of stumbling blocks would be the people who become vets are problem solvers. Again, there's a selection process. Just qualifying as a vet and coping as a vet requires some resilience and problem solving skills. And then our job is to fix other people's problems. And then suddenly I'm the one with a problem. And I go, well, I fix problems, so I've got to fix this. Instead of acknowledging that maybe I'm not the best person for the job. And then for people like practice owners, again, people are depending on you. So you feel like, well, if I tap out because I'm not doing well, it's my practice. What about my team? What about my daughter? What about... and you don't want to bother people. Lots of us feel like you don't want to be a burden to somebody else. So it's really good to hear that, as you say, most people actually kind of want to be burdened by that.
Yeah, and I think this is a reciprocal loop that actually happens too, because you feel quite sort of real and human when you've heard someone go that, well, I'm not coping really well, and you will engage with that because you're engaging for yourself on lots of levels too, because you recognise that within somebody. I'll tell you a really quick anecdote, right? I had a client who came in, it was quite high level management, who burst into tears when he came through the room on his first sort of session. And he said, I think I'm going insane. I've been driving around looking for trees that I could just flick my car off the road into. And, immediately the suicide stuff come up for me. And he was talking through tears. And I said, are you wanting to end your life? And he said, oh, no. I've looked at it, and I just want to hit the tree hard enough that I could break my femur, so I could have like 2 months off work, right? And then started crying. He said, I know it's stupid, it's romantic, it's just, I know it's so crazy. And he wasn't coping. He was stressed out, very depressed, not sleeping at all. And he had equated I can legitimately
Yeah.
have some time off work versus putting my hand up and going, I can't do this anymore. I need time off work. Right. So we had to work through this conundrum around being able to say, I'm not okay. And I actually do need to take a little bit of an extended break. And I don't need to break my femurs, right? I mean, it's insane, right?
It's insane, but I've been there, man.
Yeah.
I've been there, not quite as extreme, but there was a possibility of knee surgery. And a part of me went, fuck yes. I just kick back for a month. What a great excuse just to chill a little bit.
And it's totally irrational, right? But it's time out, right? It's I can divest from my responsibilities and accountability that I've got on a daily basis, which is why we're stressed, and moving into a place where no one's going to contact me, no one needs anything out of me, right? And as a psychologist, I'm the same, mate. I mean, I have meltdowns. Another meltdown in March this year, actually, for just a couple of days, where I just had to pull back from things. And I spent the whole bloody week crying and really upset about stuff. And it was extended grief over the death of my ex-wife. I think that once my kids had been doing really well, I just got to that point that I wanted to, it was my time basically. So it was quite complex grief stuff that was coming up for me because all my kids were doing well, because I went into clinical dad mode for 3 years after she passed, and when they were actually okay, then allowed my stuff to come out. So psychs go through it. Look, everyone goes through it, and I think it's good to talk about it, and it's good to raise your hand, and good to say, I'm actually needing something at the present point in time, whether it's just a week off or even like a couple of days off, or it's a 3-month off, because it's, the longer you leave it, the longer you need. Yeah. Right. And so what I do is regular trips, as to Bali and have a surf, or regularly take a weekend off, or regularly take a day off during the week. And I schedule that in now. And I think people in this fast-paced world don't schedule in enough. I think it's called non-strategic time off, where there's a lot of us who are busy and working in high-stress professions. When we take days off, it's actually non-strategic, and by that is that we'll go and do something else.
You right? take a day off so you can mow the lawn and clean the gutters
and catch up, right? Yeah. And that's not strategic time off. That's actually just organizing your diary to do another activity. Wow. So the doing stuff rather than the being.
This is a detour, but I'm interested what you talk about there. You're in dad caretaker mode, and then once the taking care of others burden was shifted, that things came to the fore. And I think that goes back to, my question comes back to what I was saying earlier, where we constantly in our role in that caretaker mode. Well, I'm taking care of others. There's no space for me. Is that why you sometimes have a crash, metaphorically? No, not a car crash and break your femur crash, but when you take time off, because suddenly you've got a break and some of that burden shifted, and then the shit comes out. Is that what happens?
That's what happens, right? Because there's space in there for it to come out. But the problem with, which is that, look, a bit of stress is okay, right? But extended stress is not. And it's the vicariousness of the job roles that you do as well. It's very people-centered. It's humanistic. You're dealing with grief and loss and death and pain and all that stuff, but also the good stuff that comes out of that, right? But I think that it just catches up over time, and it sits there bubbling. If analogy is, or a metaphor is that the pot's filling full of steam. Do you know what I mean? And you've got to let it off every now and then. And no matter how much you work and for how long you work and for whatever stuff you take on, at some point that's still bubbling away. So I think that when we take our eye off the ball, and usually for a lot of people who are quite successful in professions such as veterinary medicine or in medicine or in psychology, in that sort of realm as well, is that once you take the foot off the gas, it'll blow up in your face. And, I think for a lot of people, overworking sometimes is a coping strategy. So we won't let us have space, because if we really sat and we had strategic time off, where we were non-strategic time off, we just sat with it and we thought about what's going on in our body and what's going on in our brain, that it would overwhelm us and we'd cry. So there's an avoidance of feeling sad, obviously, and I'm just too busy to look at me and inside my heart, inside my brain. So you don't do it. And then all of a sudden you get really good at not doing it. And then you get really good at putting other things into your life to stop you looking at it, right? So an example might be, playing bands, and I like to record, and I like to do motorbike stuff, and I like to do all this stuff. Now it's really good when they're all in balance, but sometimes I've just got to do nothing. I've actually just got to sit there and focus within, be present, and go, what's actually happening for me? And what do I need to sort of fine tune and rectify? And sometimes that might not be time off. It might actually be that it's just working less or spending more time with my kids, or spending more time with my partner, or, spending more time walking. We've got to look at that and then fine tune and tweak it.
Love it, man. Sounds like I need to organize another bike trip with you to Bali. Because all the stuff you're saying is resonating. I'm like, yep, I'm doing that. Yep, avoiding.
It is here, right? They're awesome, the trips, and you've done a few of them, and that whole idea of doing it. But what's immediately goes through your head, right, is, when am I going to fit that in, right? Or how can I fit that in? And I think for me, anyway, at the tender age of 55, is that I actually prioritize that now more than I've ever done in my life, where I go, you know what? No, I'm going to Spain, or, you know what? No, I'm going to actually take that week off. This afternoon, I'm going to actually just, I'm not going to do those reports today. I'm going to do them tomorrow. And I'm actually going to binge watch Netflix, right? And sit around and sleep.
This is so different to most of the stuff we hear, because podcasts and books and productivity tips and shit doesn't allow for that. It's like it's all finding new ways to avoid the desire for the Netflix binge, because it's a waste of your time.
Well, that's the cultural thing, which is like it's lazy because it's not productive.
I feel it in a massive way.
It's about flipping it around, which is that it's not about being lazy. It's actually assisting with your productivity. You have time off to actually recharge, because you're a lot more productive if you're not stressed out and burnt out, right? Because you're just tinkering around the edges when you've got so much on your desk. So to be able to sort of do that, and I think sleep is a massive thing, right? I mean, all the research around sleep, the more and more we look into it. I mean, do you know that during REM sleep, it's the only time that the noradrenaline system in your body gets turned off, right?
Really?
It's the only time, only when you're in REM. Now, so people who don't get good sleep and don't get good REM sleep have a continuous adrenergic system sort of working there within their body all the time, right? Now, that's your stress system. When that's active, as you would know, and when that's activated, it's fight or flight. You're in there, you've got an amygdala activities going on, it's all your whole body's sort of in there. Now that's really good when you need to work and when you need to do stuff, but you got to switch it off. We've got to switch off. It's about working out individually what sort of fits you, your body, your sleep, your mental health, and then designing a life around it, not letting your life design put those expectations on you. So it's a flip that needs to happen around mental health. And I think that our Western system of productivity at all costs on lots of levels is counterintuitive and counterproductive to happiness and contentment.
You need to come and talk to Roz to tell her that when I'm lying on the couch watching TV and the lawn needs to be mowed, I'm doing it for a reason. It's not lazy.
Yeah, that's right. So Dwayne said it's a non-strategic time off, and it's essential to my mental health and productivity in going forward. Right? and she's there dealing with the kids.
Exactly
going,
right. Mowing
I
the lawn.
don't care about your productivity. You just need to help me with the children. Get off your ass, you lazy bastard.
The other question, then back to my episode. In her story, she talks about during that tough period for her, she goes out to a farm and she's so scatterbrained and everywhere else that the one of her clients notices that she's wearing two belts, and he's like, "What's the fuck with two belts?" And she just goes, "Yeah, sorry, my head's somewhere else." Being that guy, or being the colleague at work, or I've got a story that I almost don't want to tell, but back in Perth, I had a guy, a vet, who moved in to my neighbour's little flatlet in the back after he was getting divorced. And we chatted over the fence, like, how are you going, blah, but not a friendship at all. But I distinctly remember looking at him one day going, fuck, he looks so unhappy. And it went through my head to go, here is a prime candidate for suicide. And he did. He did. A couple of months later, he did commit suicide. and you go, well, fuck, the reason I never, I thought that, but I never did anything about it is because it's really scary. If you recognize somebody like that and you go, phew, like that person's not doing great, and specifically talking suicide, then if you're actually thinking, shit, is this person a suicide risk? Because I've spoken to friends and colleagues often who said, yeah, I've got a friend or an old colleague or somebody who's going down a path that I'm really uncomfortable with. How do you start that conversation? What do you do about it? I'm not a psych. I can't talk them through it. So yeah, what recommendations?
Well, I suppose the message there, mate, that must have been difficult. As you know, I've worked in suicide and had sort of a lot, it's been almost sort of part of my life for the last 35 years, really, not just with clients, but with friends and families and things like that as well. But you don't need to be, I think the biggest myth is that you don't need to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or, trained in mental health to talk to another human being, right? You're well qualified as as I know you, as a beautiful human being with a good heart, right? And I think there are barriers to sort of just going, like I said before, the simple, are you okay, mate? Do you need to have a yarn or a beer or to just sort of connect? There's that barrier for us all that I think that, and look, even as psych sometimes, because some of it is, and we have to be honest about this, is do we really want to know and do we have time in our lives to be able to deal with it?
100%. Right? So in that scenario that I talked about, that was my excuse. I had a lot of shit going on, so I didn't feel like that emotional burden.
Yeah, big time.
Just
right?
So selfish.
But you know what? I think it's protective, right, on lots of levels, because we might want to melt down. And look, we need to look at reality here too, right? Suicide risk assessments that are done by psychiatrists and psychologists, right, aren't worth the piece of paper they're printed on, because suicide risk is never static. Right, it just doesn't sort of go and stay there. It'll whoop 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 whoop. And I've had clients that have suicide risks in the morning who have completed in the afternoon. This is, and people, family members that I was with them almost sort of 24/7 that have managed to do it. And I think I've told you about that. So it's we can't save every soul too, right? So this whole idea that suicide is totally preventable is a misnomer. What we can do is everything that we can do on some levels, right? And it's not about burdening us with the guilt that we could have done more. We do what we can at the time that we can with the resources that we actually have. And I think when you strip apart all the research around it, some people who actually haven't completed or haven't attempted suicide, when you go and ask them about what that was, it might have been that they actually noticed an animal, right, or a bird in the tree, or it might have noticed that a smile on a child's face, or it might have noticed that their neighbour said, "Hey, how you going?" which made them go, "Well, there is someone else out there for me." It might have meant that they got on a podcast like yours, right, and they heard something that resonated with them, that felt like they were connected to a bigger thing, to a greater thing, and they weren't as lonely. So those protective mechanisms can be very wide and very varied. But I think the thing is to me, is that it's a lot about being that I'm not alone, and I'm part of something else that's actually greater than me, and there's some meaning in me staying in this world, and it's quite intangible and sometimes magical. And I think the biggest risk factor is when people are very, very emotionally dysregulated or drunk, right, or under the influences of drugs, because the rationality around no one's going to miss me, the disinhibition isn't there. You can imagine one of the first things that people talk about when they think about leaving this earth is to go, no one's going to miss me, right?
Or now even worse, they'll be better off without me.
That's great, right? Yeah, exactly right. So it's like they're doing their family a favor. Now, that takes a while to get to, right? But it doesn't take a while to get to if you're drunk or you're using drugs, because you disseminate and you start thinking about that sort of pattern.
What? So the policeman of the new cortex that can think rationally and say, "Oh, look, that emotion that you're feeling is bullshit. Let's find a better way." You switch that guy off with a little bit of chemical help, and then that primitive brain of yours takes control and goes, "Yeah, this is a reasonable
Yeah.
option.
And I think, the impulsivity is one of the highest risks as well. So if you're impulsive of nature, and, we're all more impulsive when we're disinhibited through drugs and alcohol. So the rational brain has to be there as a bit of a policeman over the top of it. Otherwise, we'll do rash, impulsive sort of things. And a lot of completed suicides are they call it death through misadventure too. I don't know if you've heard about that, but sometimes you get death through misadventure because they don't know whether it's a suicide or whether it isn't a suicide, because it might be a little bit out of character. They're driving fast but ended up hitting a tree. But then they go, well, there's no skid marks there. Or they were, stepping on the side of a small building and fell off. Like accidental, but maybe not accidental sort of stuff, right? And well, that's when the impulsive brain, why are you in high risk situations like that to start off with? But you're rationally going into a high risk situation where it may or may not happen. So, the rational brain plays a really big part of that. And the rational brain kicks in when you've got to converse with another human being, right? You're mentalizing about the impact of what you're saying on them, and they're impacting what they're saying on you. So there's this loop that goes on, which actually makes the rational brain start to talk and have social reciprocity in your communication, which then sort of distracts you away from that ledge, if that makes sense. So talking about it is an amazing thing.
That variability of suicide risk that you mentioned, that's the scary thing for me, specifically with vets. Because for the common person, or let's say average person on the street, if I suddenly wake up and I'm suicide, what's the word? Idealization, or it takes a bit of planning. You can't just, it's not immediately accessible to you to go, well, I'm feeling that right now, but I can't do anything about it. And maybe by the time you've got your plan in action, it's past, or you've had some somebody spoken to you or something you mentioned. But again, my guest here, her job was, she had an equine vet practice. She would have had a car full of lethal barb. So when that impulse hits, the means, the availability, the skill, it's all there. So it's a very, very quick, it can be a very quick leap from maybe this is a good idea to actually finishing the job. Just really, really frightening. And I don't know what to say.
It's frightening, mate. Ease and means is an important risk factor. When we are dealing with someone and we've got a safety plan, when someone is actually quite suicidal, we remove things like ropes, poisons, Panadols, medicines, that sort of stuff from their environment, that if they are in that state, that they haven't got ease of doing it, right? So that's almost step one. So you bring up a really, really important point, which is that how is a working vet who's depressed and possibly suicidal at their different sort of stages, how do you remove that risk when they need it as part of their everyday working toolkit? It's a great question, Hugh, and I don't know what the answer is to that. I think it is the preemptive stuff, which they never get to the point, or they're assisted early intervention and educated around that. If they do get to that point, it's actually not safe for them to be carrying around that sort of stuff. And if it was any other profession, they wouldn't have access to it.
Back to those conversations, if you do think there's somebody at risk, do you ask? Like, is it, because it sounds like such a confronting, scary question to say to somebody, because you mentioned it earlier, you say to somebody, are you thinking of suicide? Are you suicidal? Is that a question that you ask, or is it just engaging in a conversation and saying, hey, how's things, what's happening? And if the reason I ask is I did an online suicide prevention thing, and they said that it's very important that you front up and ask, are you hey mate, not just are you okay day, are you actually thinking of euthanasia, suicide? Is that something that you ask?
Yeah, well, what I do is, the are you okay is a good, depending on how close the relationship you got with the person, but I think it's a good starter. And then I wouldn't stop there, which is that, are you really okay? Is there risk here? Are you actually actively suicidal, right? Now, there's things called non-concrete, just to go a little bit into, pulling it apart a little bit. Someone who has got a concrete plan is at a really high risk. So they're, tomorrow at 2:00, I'm going to take a lethal barb dose. Someone who's planning that stuff, they're moving their schedule around. They've been thinking about that, not just impulsively. So we've spoken about the impulsive stuff that happens when people are not in a rational sort of mind, when they're emotionally dysregulated. That's a risk. The other risk, the higher risk, is to someone who's planned it and, they've got their note already, that sort of stuff. So that's a concrete planning of a death date or a death time, right? They've got it all in place. So we check out what's going on. So probably in that question, are you planning to hurt yourself? Right, is the first sort of thing I would probably say. Have you got an active plan around what you're going to do and how that would happen? Right. And if they've got a date, then they're a really high risk. Now, they may be telling you that, and they may not tell you that too, remember. Sometimes that happens too.
Oh, I would imagine that you wouldn't, though. If you've got a plan, the last thing you want is for somebody to intervene. So you say, no.
Intervene, stop.
Or
right.
Do they say?
Well, I think it goes from the spectrum. Let's go back to the start, which is, I've got too many barriers for me even asking for help, but I'm not that highly suicidal. But I need help with my mental health. Through to, I've got help-seeking behaviour. I actually want to get some assistance with this, but I'm not sure how. Like what we're talking about. To, I've made a plan, and the help-seeking behaviour stops, and I'm actually going to complete suicide. Right now, that's the danger one. That's why it's high risk, an extreme high risk, and sometimes you don't even know about that. But you might see, I had a friend, but while I was studying as a psychologist, when I was in only first year, second year uni, who was in the band scene, that came over to our house with 3 guys living there in the band, and gave us all her posters, all the band posters and some of her albums, right? And she said, I'm just moving, I'm just needing to get rid of some stuff, and I thought you guys might like it. And we said, no worries, sat around, have a drink with her. 4 days later, she'd overdosed. Now, one of those things is, I'm giving away my stuff. You're almost planning a death. They're saying things that they usually don't say to you, from a way. You get a spike, right, sometimes, where their actually mood lifts when they know that they're going to do it. So any unusual behaviours that there are, this is why it's so hard here, because you don't know whether they're just having a great day. Right, and that things are turning the corner on. And that's what happened with my partner's brother, that he seemed actually okay, and he was living in a unit right next to us, and he was connected to all the services. He was doing really, really well. And it wasn't until after we'd found him that we checked his phone, and he'd been on suicide, how do you hang yourself stuff for weeks. Right now, we weren't aware of that, and I'm a trained bloody clinical psych, that's living in the house next to him, monitoring him, having a cup of tea with him every time he goes to bed, and inviting him all this sort of stuff. And I didn't even see what was going on. So I think all we can do is ask the question and be curious. And look, if we've got an inkling, all they're going to say is, oh no, or don't be so silly, if they don't want to tell us, right? But if we say, I'm really, really concerned about you, and this intuitively, I'm just feeling that you need some support, if that's what you're feeling, you're either going to be right or you're going to be wrong. And if you're wrong, that's okay. They think that another human being cares about them. That's a big bonus and a big tick. And if you're right, it at least opens up the door of a window that they can go through to connect with you and possibly not do it.
So recap for yourself, recognize that you're not doing well, and connect. Make sure you connect with somebody, and as an outsider, ask. If you think there's an issue, just ask.
And be curious, and don't hold back because of shame or embarrassment, because the end product is going to be that this person really cares about me, and that could be a protective factor.
You're a legend, Dwayne. Thank you so much for the very short notice.
No, you're a legend, Hugh, and thank you for inviting me on your wonderful podcast. Happy to help, mate.